All right, sorry I couldn't be here, but I'm going to give you some quick notes on interval and set notation. So if you want, um, in your pink packets that we handed out yesterday, you should have a blank page on the back. You can just kind of take notes there. But basically, I just want to introduce a couple of things that you're probably not used to seeing, but you're probably used to solving these inequalities anyway. So let's just start with something basic. So for inequalities, let's say you have something like x plus 5 is greater than or equal to 11, and you wanted to solve this. Okay, you solve this just like a normal equation, right? So you just subtract 5 on both sides, and then you get x is greater than or equal to 6. Okay, this right here is what we call algebraic notation. Okay, and you're probably used to writing your answer that way, and you're also probably used to graphing this on a number line. So real quick, as far as the graph is concerned, you just essentially put a 6 on the number line. This is telling us that the answers for x are all equal or greater to 6. So hopefully you remember that that means we have a closed circle. And since x is greater, we shade to the right. Okay, and so this is what the graph would look like. Okay, so we also have now something called interval notation. So let's kind of leave this example for the time being. Interval notation looks something like this. So for interval notation, the symbols that we use are either parentheses, so a left parentheses, a right parentheses, or brackets, a left bracket or a right bracket. Okay? And you basically use these anytime a point is included or filled in. And parentheses are used if the point is open or we are using infinity as kind of like the boundary. Okay, and I think this will make more sense with some examples, but all you do is just read. So you read the graph from left to right. And so for the previous graph, here's kind of how you would do it. So if I'm reading this graph from left to right, the first point on the number line that's part of our answer is this filled in circle, which is at 6. So we write down 6, comma, and since that 6 was filled in, we're going to use a bracket to indicate that. And so basically we just list lowest to highest x value. Well, looking at this picture, we started at 6, and it looks like this goes on forever, so that's where we use positive infinity. Anytime we use an infinity, we just use a parentheses with it, because infinity is not really a number we can ever get to, so we use a parentheses to indicate that. Okay, so that's interval notation in a nutshell. Set builder notation, or set notation, is just a fancier way of describing this algebraic solution. So what that looks like is something like this. So you always have these fancy little braces, and then you say x, and then this symbol here, And then, for example, we would use, if we're using the same graph, we would say x is greater than or equal to 6. Okay? And the way that you would read this is the set of all x values. So that's what this part means. This means our variable is x, and we're looking at all the x's such that, that's what this symbol means, the vertical line. It's all x's such that x is greater than or equal to 6, which is a little bit redundant, but it's kind of an old school mathematical way to describe an entire set. So that's kind of how you would use set notation. All right, so let's just look at a couple of pictures. Okay, so for example, let's say we have this number line, and this is our solution. So here we're shading from 5 to 7. 5 is filled in, 7 is open. And then we're shading from 10 on forever. And that's it. So in interval notation, I actually think that's easiest here. We read from left to right. And so the first number that's part of my answer is going to be this 5. So again, we start with 5. And since it's filled in, we use a bracket, comma, and then we go until there's a separation. So we're going to stop at 7, and since 7 has an open circle, we use a parentheses there. Okay? And since we have another section that works, we use this symbol that stands for union, which is just a fancy way of saying or. Okay? So our answers are over here between 5 and 7, not including 7, or if we, again, are going from left to right, this section starts at 10, and it's filled in, so that's a bracket, and we go to infinity, so that's going to be with a parentheses. Okay, so that's the interval notation. The algebraic notation, we would use a compound inequality here. So this translates to x is between, whoops, let me rewrite that. That should be x is less than 7, but also greater than or equal to 5. So hopefully you've seen that notation before. Or x is greater than or equal to 10. Okay, so this, anytime you're stuck between two numbers, you use this compound inequality notation. X goes in the middle. You always go from left to right, just like we do with interval notation, and we just keep the symbols matching what we see. So if it's an open circle or a closed circle, here we have a closed circle for 5, we have a less than or equal to. 7 was open, so that's just less than. Again, we use or since there's a second section here, and then this section starts at 10 and goes on to the right, so that's x is greater than or equal to 10. Okay? Now, the set notation for this would just be, again, fancy braces here, and then we have x such that 5 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal or less than 7, or x is greater than or equal to 10. So it's just kind of putting this algebraic notation to a fancier system. Okay, so that's basically how interval notation works. That's good enough, I think, background. So now what you're going to do is go through pages 2, 3, and the top of 4 in the packet. Okay? All right, so I'll see you guys tomorrow.